Hi there, I'm here with Dan of Dan Cooper Garden, and we're going to tell you what essential tools you need. It's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog. So Dan, we've got an impressive collection of tools here. What's the essential tool that every gardener needs?
Well, I would say it was a trowel, because you're going to be planting at some stage, and a trowel is a good all-round thing. You can use it for planting and weeding and all sorts of jobs, getting compost out of sacks, for example. So I would go for a really nice quality metal one if you can. Avoid painted finishes and coatings because they do tend to flake off and they often expose a surface that will rust more easily. And a nice sharp edge is really useful, especially if you've got quite heavy soil to dig into. So I think a trowel would be the number one essential. If you want to avoid rust, you can go for copper, which has lots of great qualities. That the soil sticks to copper much less, and of course it never rusts. So that would be an alternative.
Because you see, I love copper tools and I've been seeing a few, and also I've seen a few on your website as well. I mean, I thought they were there because they were just so beautiful, but there's actually a practical reason for them.
Well, copper has a low friction coefficient, so it means that soil sticks to copper less than it sticks to steel. So that's one good thing. But yes, the lack of rust is another. Also, you can sharpen copper more than you can sharpen steel, so it has a slightly sharper edge. The only drawback, I would say, is that if you hit a really big stone or something metallic under the ground very hard, it isn't quite as strong as steel is.
What's the number 2 tool that we all need, every gardener needs?
Well, I think you need something that cuts. So you're likely to be deadheading, doing a little bit like pruning perhaps, trimming things to make them a bit neater. So I would say out of all of the tools that you could use for cutting, I would say a pair of secateurs is the most important thing. What's really essential with choosing secateurs is that you must try them out in your hand, because everyone's hands are very different and everyone's grip is very different. So it's a good idea to go somewhere where you can actually pick them up and try them. Make sure that action works well for you, and a good clip or something to fix the blades back in is really handy, so that when you put them in your pocket or your apron, they don't ping back open again.
And number 3?
Number 3, and people will be divided on this, because there are people who like wearing gardening gloves and there are people who don't. But I would say, for lots and lots of reasons, that a pair of gardening gloves is my number 3. Now, it all depends what kind of gardening you're going to be doing. If you're doing very lightweight stuff, so if you're just going to be moving a few pots around, or you're going to be deadheading or gardening mostly in the dry weather, then a pair of nitrile gloves like these, a bit like a second skin, very, very easy to wear and comfortable as well. But if you're going to be doing heavier gardening, and for example gardening in the wet, leather gloves with a waterproof lining are really brilliant, because they will protect your hands. They will give you a little bit more protection from any stones or sharp thorns that happen to be out there. And the important thing is that you're able to really easily make a fist with them like that. And if you can do that and it feels comfortable, then they're the right fit for you. But some people like to get their hands in the earth, and that is fine. But if you've got any kind of allergies, or you just want to keep your hands in good shape, then gloves are an essential.
And it's a really good point you make about the comfortable ones, because every now and then people give you kind of gifty set gloves, and you put your hands into them, it's like being in a sort of straitjacket. You wouldn't be able to do anything except sort of push a door open with it.
Yes, when they're like boxing gloves, they're absolutely pointless, and they don't really get any better with wear either. So I've had a few of those in my time, and they generally stay in the shed and never get used. So I won't put anything on the website that I haven't used myself and road tested, and some of the things I've actually been using for many years before I even had the idea of Dan Cooper Garden. So I think that's particularly important to me, is that I sort of have tried and tested them. I know how they work, so I can put my hand on my heart and say they're the best in the class.
And so the next one.
Well, I tend to find, having a small garden myself, that I end up with sweeping up quite a lot. So depends how small your garden is, but I would say that either a really good yard brush or broom would be next. And if your garden's quite small or you've got a balcony, a dustpan and brush that's designed for being outside use, so not a nice indoor one. So this one's got a painted finish that will protect the metal, and then a nice sturdy brush with a good bristle. That will be really useful when you come to sort of clearing up after yourself. Which brings me on to a really good bucket. And again, I like a proper galvanised metal pail. You can get these from hardware shops, and they are much cheaper than some of the sort of pretty pails that you get. And although a little bit heavy, these will last you a lifetime. I think are well worth having.
That's really good. And just to give people an idea of the garden size we're talking about, we've featured Dan's garden once or twice before, most specifically in the How to Group Pots video, which I'll put in the description below. And also, if you want to catch up on Middlesized Garden videos, do just tap the subscribe button. And then the other garden that we featured with Dan much more equates to a middle-sized garden, because although it's an allotment, it's actually got several borders where he's grown things like chrysanthemums. We did the video on how to grow chrysanthemums with Dan, and he does dahlias and obviously vegetable and fruit and things. And if you can imagine putting a lawn in the middle of those allotment borders, you'd have a middle-sized garden basically, wouldn't you?
Yes.
But what all this means is that Dan does not need a lawnmower.
I don't. I have a strimmer, which I think is a handy thing for lots of jobs, even if it's just reducing the bulk of leaves that you've collected up at the end of the year, but I've never needed a lawnmower.
And so if the garden's going a bit bigger, for example, to my size garden, which is 100 foot long, 80 feet wide, what would you say adding to that list of tools?
So I think there's about 10 different things that you would add, and it would depend on what kind of work you're going to be doing, whether you do have lawns, whether you have borders. I would definitely go for a spade. This is a golden spade. That's just the paint finish, and the paint finish will eventually come off this, but the steel underneath is a good quality and won't rust if you look after it well. But a spade gives you the facility to plant bigger things like shrubs and trees, to dig trenches, if, for example, if you're planting potatoes or any other kind of vegetables, perennials, all sorts of things. So I would say a spade is slightly more useful than a fork, but if you want the spade and fork combination, which is quite traditional, I would go for that. So that would be next. Then, if you don't go for the big border fork, a normal hand fork like this is a good tool to have, because it's just a step up from the trowel for things like weeding and actually getting things back out of the ground rather than putting them into the ground. This one's got very sharp tines on it, which is good, so you can really sort of get into quite heavy soils.
I often find if I have to get something tricky out, that I'll attack it with this
Yes.
for quite a long time, and then get the spade out and
Yes.
dig it up.
Yes. And then a weeding tool of some kind. So again, a lot of this comes down to preference, a little bit like the Secateurs. You've got to try and see what you find easiest. I like this claw cultivator, which is a bit like a fork, but it's been turned in on itself, and this just helps you really break up the surface of heavy soil, for example, if you're going to be sowing seeds. And it's also very good if you can't just reach out those leaves or something from behind a clump of plants. Very good for collecting up stuff, even getting things out of gutters. But you might prefer something slightly slicker like this hand hoe, which has a sharp edge, and you draw it towards you and it sort of slices the weeds out from underneath themselves, and then if you just leave them on the surface, they will shrivel up and die. Sometimes you will want to do jobs that are a little bit too small for a pair of secateurs, in which case a pair of scissors or a pair of snips like these are really good. Now here I would say, again, if you're just starting out, you're on a tight budget, you can use your scissors that you use inside perfectly well for doing things like deadheading. But if you're going to be doing a lot of deadheading, harvesting herbs, trimming things, for example, if you've got a bonsai or anything like that, or even if you're maintaining your house plants, a little pair of snips like this is really good. They have very, very thin blades, which is really useful when you're picking flowers, for example, or deadheading, because you can really get in to the little bundles of flowers, like floribunda roses or something like that, when you're just trying to take out the the dead flowers, they're really, really handy for that. And a pair of secateurs, a bit too bulky for getting in there. So I would recommend those.
Someone recommended them to me. It was Frances Moskovits, when I was interviewing her on how to make an amazing flower border. And she said, I deadhead 4 times a day, which I think is rather more than most of us would do. But she said, I keep snippers everywhere. And so I got a pair of snippers. And they're actually much quicker than the secateurs. That's the other thing. They not only sort of get in there on those little heads, but I found it was easy to go snip, 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 snip.
Yes.
Whereas the secateurs, there's just a bit more of an action. And obviously, if you're doing a lot of deadheading, then actually something that snips really quickly really makes a difference.
Yes. The tool that I would definitely not be without, even in my small garden, is a pruning saw, because secateurs you can cut up to 1.5 centimetres, but once you start to get over that diameter of twig or branch, then you are putting a strain on them and probably putting a strain on yourself as well. So I love a pruning saw because it's got this very sort of narrow and slightly angled blade, which helps you to get in and take branches that are slightly bigger off. And if you get one like this one, which just folds up nicely, you can put that in your apron pocket and take that out with you, and you don't have to worry about the sort of teeth, which are really quite sharp, causing you any harm in your garden. So if you have hedges, or which could be anything from a lavender hedge up to a much bigger hedge, then you're going to need a pair of shears, either manual ones or possibly you might want electrical hedge trimmers. So a good pair of shears, these have got a nice long handle, very sharp. These are quite good for sort of precision work. If you've got a lot to do, then you might want to go electric, but I love a pair of hand shears. So, but if you didn't have anything that you needed to trim like that, then you can get away with doing quite a lot again with a pair of secateurs.
And I can see another thing that actually I like a lot, and that are the knee supports. What are they, knee pads?
Yes.
Knee pads?
Yes. Well, one of two things, I think. Now, again, you've got the economy version, which I sometimes use, which is I often take an old compost sack around with me, and if I've got to kneel on the ground, I just put that down and kneel on it. Not awfully comfortable or awfully warm, but it's an economical thing to do. You can also get kneelers, which are really good. They usually have a handle made of a very similar fabric to this. And of course, you have to remember where those are, or kneelers, which attach to your knee. And that means that they're with you kind of all the time, wherever you are. Then there's things like a hose pipe or a watering can. Again, you're going to need one or other of those, I suspect, in any size garden, but you can make do. And I put this here because this is a vintage watering can, and I think you do see these around quite often. And I suppose what I would say is that you don't have to buy everything new. So I think this has a lot of charm, and you could probably say they definitely don't make them like this anymore. The only thing I would advise people, if they see a really nice watering can in a vintage shop or at a brocante or something like that, is to ask the whoever's selling it to fill it with water for you, and just leave it there for a little while to make sure that it is watertight, because a lot of these old watering cans leak and you can't necessarily see when you're buying it. So that's my one little trick. Whenever I'm buying a vintage can, I always make them fill it with water for me first.
Wheelbarrows. Now, if you have
Yes.
a small garden, you presumably don't want a wheelbarrow because it's nowhere to put it. But have you got any views on when you need a wheelbarrow and what sort of a wheelbarrow to get?
Well, wheelbarrows are, if you need to travel a long distance in the garden or even outside the garden, so for example, we take things from our garden to our allotment, then a wheelbarrow is going to take a lot of strain off you, because obviously you can put quite a lot in it. If you've got a nice, well-inflated tyre on it, it makes life really, really easy. But I think for most people with a small and middle-sized garden, one of those flexible plastic trugs where you can, it has quite a big capacity, but you can bring the handles together, that's pretty good actually for transporting large amounts, and they're light, so you can get a reasonable amount of soil, compost, leaves, whatever in it, and still have it manageable. Much easier to carry, I find, 2 of something, because I'm terrible for sort of being lopsided, which isn't very good for your back. So yeah, a couple of those will probably ensure that you can move most of the things that you'd like to move in the garden. One thing I would say with things like wheelbarrows and other bigger bits of garden equipment as well, is that if you're not going to use it very often and you've got a neighbour or a friend who has one, is, you know, share things like that, because if you're going to use it once in a blue moon to move some manure from the front to the back of your house, then you don't need to have a wheelbarrow all of the time.
So if you're a beginner gardener, don't miss our Beginner Gardeners playlist at the end of this video. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.